and welcome everyone to this first session of PhocusWire Pulse for the month of May. I am delighted to be joined by Heather Dahl, CEO of Indicio, and Gus Pina, Director of SITA Lab. We are going to be talking about security in the context of identity and verification when it comes to travel, whether to cross a border or to check into a hotel, and also in relation to COVID testing and vaccine requirements, because at least in the near term, as we come out of the pandemic, things like testing and vaccination are indeed part of our identity for travel. Heather, maybe if we could start with you. Indicio is developing decentralized identity and verification solutions. We also hear the term self-sovereign identity. Can you briefly explain to us what this means?
Right, absolutely. Decentralized identity, it's an emerging form of digital identity that's based on individual control and human rights. So it's an approach to online identity that's designed to address the increasing problem of organizations who control individuals' access to the online world, and then correlating all that information about us when we try to get information about ourselves. Self-sovereign identity, or SSI, you'll hear, is a term that's used to describe the digital movement that recognizes that an individual should control their own identity. So SSI allows people to interact with the digital world with the same freedom and capacity for trust as they do in the offline world. Think about it this way. When you receive a driver's license, the Department of Motor Vehicles does not feel that they're issuing you that card to go prove your age to buy alcoholic beverages, for say. But we use that same card because it proves our age to make that purchase. However, the grocery store doesn't what we call phone home to the database that the Department of Motor Vehicles use to issue that card. So that's what we're replicating in the digital world, is the ability to prove something about ourselves to an organization online and have that verified without having to directly hit a centralized database to prove that identity.
Okay, let me just ask a few questions to make sure that I'm understanding you and everyone's understanding you. So in the prior to this, in old systems, traditional systems, identity, for example, for my bank, for travel, was actually stored in individual databases, if you will, correct?
Correct.
And this keeps it, in other words, so that it removes the need for a single storage site and therefore some of the security issues that can come with that. Is that part of it?
Correct. And what it does is, instead of having to go to my bank, download the statement, right, into a PDF, email that PDF to the receiving party, and the receiving party looks at that PDF and then accepts it. It actually allows them to, one, be able to share that claim without having to do all the email and the download, but two, not relying on the authenticity of PDFs, because they're able to verify the claims that I'm making about my bank account using the blockchain for that verification.
Okay, so let's get into this a bit more. So Gus, I know that SITA has been doing some work around self-sovereign identity for several years. Can you speak to what you see as some of the benefits for this, for the travel industry?
Yeah, I mean, today we trust no one, so we inconvenience everybody. If you think of how many times you hand away your personal information, and there's a lot of liability and risk really for everyone, airports, governments, airlines, hotels. So really our vision has been to how can we unify those silos of trust from my house all the way to poolside at my resort, but do that in a way that preserves privacy, eliminates the fraud, and is bulletproof safe. And we think that decentralized identity, verifiable credentials is a solid foundation to get there.
And when you speak to some of those privacy issues, I guess, and I know you and I have spoken before, it's both privacy concerns maybe of the traveler about not wanting to share information, and also, let's say, of a border patrol person or a hotel or whatever not wanting to be accessing data potentially that puts them at jeopardy of violating, let's say, GDPR or something such as that. Is that right? It's kind of on both sides?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, particularly hospitality staff don't want to be looking at medical data to say, do they comply with current protocols of COVID testing or vaccinations, right? So what we're trying to say is, okay, somebody has to establish that trust as an authority that, that they can review those things and say, yeah, we trust this person, and then that trust can be transcendent across the journey. And then everybody just says, yeah, I trust that authority, and therefore I trust this passenger to be doing what they need to be doing.
So let's talk a bit more about the technology behind this. When we talk about blockchain, we often hear the term immutable. Is a blockchain system really unable to be hacked?
You want to take that one, Heather?
Sure, I can take that one. Yeah, so what we're doing here in the case of decentralized identity is we're not writing PII to the ledger. Okay. Actually, the PII is held by the individual, or what we call the holder. And so when you look at the actual blockchain, what you're doing is you're listing the decentralized identifiers, or DIDs, lookups. And so when it comes to hacking or a target, there's no PII valuable information. It's basically, I'll call it a new version of the phone book, where you're looking up an organization and what is their phone number. It's publicly available information. And to use that, it allows you to eventually resolve and use the cryptographic keys for an individual peer-to-peer data exchange.
Okay, so the block.
I think that's key. Is a lot of organizations will think, oh, I'm putting PII, I'm putting the actual data and hashing it to the ledger, and that's not the case in decentralized identity.
So the blockchain comes into play more for that exchange?
Yes. It's used more as a lookup mechanism for decentralized identifiers.
Okay, so then I guess I would ask, is that exchange transaction immutable? Is it unhackable? How confident are you?
In this case, it's still an emerging technology, but I'm very confident from what we have seen on the security audits and the trials that we have conducted thus far, the security evaluations. And so we continue to push forward, and we have yet to have a negative report on it. In fact, what's interesting is when this technology has been tested for man-in-the-middle attacks, actually those who are doing the attacks and the hacking are actually pleasantly surprised, because they're so fascinated by the fact that the man-in-the-middle is non-existent.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, the key thing is that the data is in control of the person. Only they can unlock it. And the exchanges are peer-to-peer.
Okay.
And the way it works is they can't be correlated. So I can interact with different parties, and there's no way to correlate those interactions. So there's no brokering or centralized database of information, and there's no man in the middle, as Heather said.
Right.
Okay.
So
I know
the connection is made, but both keys have to be present to transmit the data from one party to the other. The other essential point is that the identifier of the person is actually separate from the claims about that identifier. So it offers better privacy and security. So the transmission is peer-to-peer. You also remove the large centralized databases from the exchange, because it's peer-to-peer rather than direct integration between large centralized databases.
So I know that the two of you recently worked together with the government of Aruba on their Health Pass trial that used this type of system to verify COVID credentials. Can you just briefly talk about what you learned through that and the potential that you see there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these solutions are really looking at how do I digitize test results and vaccination results. And really, the reality is that's a snapshot in time. What Aruba wanted was a way to really keep the island safe and address any situation that might occur in real time. So that could be a mutation of some kind that requires a different booster shot or something like that. So in this case, the Ministry of Health acted as the authority that can trust the initial credentials, issue that trusted traveler credential to the traveler. And now hotels, casinos, discotheques, whatever, can verify that, the government trusts this person to be here and do what they want to do. but it also gives the government the control at any time to be able to revoke that status for whatever reason. So it hides information from the hospitality staff. They were very happy about that, and the complexity of having to understand the current protocol, because it's changing continuously, and it puts that liability and control back on the authority that's creating those protocols. So they were very happy with having that control and privacy aspects of it as well.
Heather, anything that you learned through that trial that still needs to be tweaked or fixed?
Well, there are two, in decentralized identity, there are two conversations that go on. One is, will the average person be able to use this? And two, will governments accept decentralized identity? And what we learned on the ground in the wild was yes and yes. The first was, the app was like a normal app that you would download. In fact, to visit Aruba, you have to download the Aruba Health app. So we had, for the purposes of this trial, a very similar version. People were able to download it. They were able to QR scan in order to claim their credential to the laboratory when they took the COVID test at the airport. They were able to receive the results of their test and accept the result, and that therefore were issued a credential. They easily consented to share the required information with the government. That was a one tap. And then they received their what was called a happy traveler card. And so when they went to the various venues, it was scanning a QR code and the information was shared, and hit yes, consent to share it. And so it happened actually quicker and more seamlessly than I thought going into the trial. What was the most emotional part of it that, I've been working in this for 10 years now, was the response of the venues, the hospitality providers, the businesses saying, we have been struggling either running these paper books or, questioning, et cetera. But all we had to do was one mobile app scan, and we were able to confidently receive information that this traveler had been approved, met the health requirements, and can enter our venue. And we feel more confident about the safety, the health and safety of our employees. And to see that emotion in the exit interviews with those business owners was really astounding to me.
So what will it take then? I mean, all of that sounds really wonderful. What will it take for there to be more widespread adoption of this type of solution related to identity and verification?
Yeah, I think currently, it's still seen as an emerging technology. So there's still kind of hesitance to adopt it. They'd rather solve problems in more conventional ways. Put it in a database. So I think what we did in Aruba, and what we continue to want to do is to prove the effectiveness of this in the real world, get more attention around it, and drive more adoption. So that's our plan, is to continue to demonstrate that it works, it's reliable, it's safe. And it's not so far out that we can start to put attention to it.
Is part of the issue that blockchain is still so misunderstood?
Well, the interesting thing, though, is that when we talk about decentralized identity, the blockchain is really hidden so deep into it that it's not a factor. Certainly, when people hear that word, it complicates the conversation, because they say, "Oh, yeah, it's all the things that it's immutable," but it really is just a facilitator of trust. It's not really brokering or handling the personal information. It's about how do you facilitate the exchange of information, and that those credentials can be verified against the source of them. So it's an underpinning that's really not that significant, but it's a huge enabler of decentralized identity.
And Heather, I'm wondering, so how, it seems to me there's a lot of stakeholders involved in making this work. You've got the governments, you've got, let's say, the hospitality sector, the airline industry, the testing labs when it comes to COVID identity. How does, is that coming together, or do you feel like progress is being made in getting the right people to pay attention to this?
Absolutely. Decentralized identity is a team sport. And so where SITA Labs is brought together the partnerships and they brought to the table. And so this case, we had the government of Aruba, we had the hospitality providers on the island, we had SITA, we had Indicio on the technology standpoint. We also had healthcare involved in this. And so what it is making sure that you first develop contained, clear use cases and test those, and then scale to the next level after that initial test. And through that process, you gain confidence amongst all the parties. You also have the ability of how you're going to work together, the processes, and then you also have the ability to define, okay, what is the governance around this ecosystem? And so you go out, you build together, test it, prove it, and move to the next step. And that's where SITA Lab's approach about creating these, what I'll call closed controlled ecosystems for the purposes of testing, is succeeding.
And we're just about out of time, but let me just ask, a lot of the examples that we're hearing relate to this cross-border travel and air travel and all of that, but are there applications then across all of travel? We're getting ready to hear about the vacation rental industry and security issues. Could this potentially be used as identification for that type of booking?
Absolutely. That's where we want to get to, is to really unify all of that so that those credentials can be reused and streamline and make things simpler throughout the journey, not just the air component of it.
And so then the traveler, will we potentially, is the goal then to get to the day where the traveler then kind of just has to deal with this once and it is then accepted universally?
That's where we want to get to, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to keep tracking the progress on that. Thank you so much, Heather Dahl of Indicio, Gus Pina of SITA Lab. We appreciate you helping us understand these issues related to decentralized identity. And for our next session, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jill Menz.